Hey everyone. Today I was joined again by Jake from the Meaningful Nonsense podcast, and our conversation centered around freedom in this time of COVID 19 shutdown. I believe we didn't really convince each other of our own points, but it was still a very productive conversation, and that's one of the beauties of debate. We have very different ideas as to what's appropriate given this unique circumstance, and you as the audience can figure out which side you align with the most. So, without further ado, here we go. Hey everyone. Today we're joined again by Jake, and our topic for discussion is freedoms and how our freedoms have been affected by this COVID 19 situation. Jake mentioned to me that he's been frustrated with what is perceived to be a misuse of government power. Personally, I don't really feel that way, so we're bound for an interesting discussion here. I think really the goal is for Jake to move me more into that sense of feeling like something bad has happened with the government's handling of the situation. And maybe for me, it would be to bring Jake more into my side of things. So we'll see how things go. Jake, you want to say anything before we begin?
Oh yeah, yeah. Well, first I just want to say thanks for having me on the show, and I think what you do is great, and I think it's good to come together. And yeah, I think most likely we'll have some agreements, and we can find some common ground and some resolutions going forward.
Yeah, it sounds good to me. So Jake, why don't you begin by explaining your perspective on what's been happening here?
Yeah. So the way I look at it, I mean, this, and we'll talk. I guess obviously we'll talk about the pandemic, but this pandemic was out there, and it was coming to North America, Canada, United States, uh, in January, for sure. I mean, it was taking place in Asia, it was spreading. And so, where I have the big disagreement is the government didn't act on the front end. So, they didn't act accordingly, they didn't act quick. We pay government for. We pay government to help us out, protect the citizens, right, from any external, sort of any foreign disruption or danger, quote unquote. And so what has happened is the way I see it is because they didn't take action when it was time to take I would say maybe mid to late January, early February, they're actually overdoing it now. And so that's where I see the big issue. And so now all of a sudden, it's on the back end where all these rules and these I guess these laws can be created now and create these implications for us. And so, things like setting up fines and things like that. I would have approached it in a different manner, and we can get to that. And I'm not saying no government, but I'm just saying it's an overreach in terms of the fines that are set in place and sort of the complete and utter hysteria. And I think it's been fundamentally created. Obviously, the virus is serious. There's no doubt. It's real. There's no denying that. But I think the hysteria is somewhat created by the government overreach in that sense.
Okay, that's a fair perspective. Maybe we should begin at the beginning. You mentioned January. I do agree that if people acted sooner, things could have been better. But back in January, what would you have liked to see happen?
Mm. Yeah, I would have liked to see. So, for example, the mandate by the government would have been the way I see it is if you are sick, you stay home. So basically, if you get, because I think they had an idea of what was taking place. Unless they were totally ignorant, which would be sad, which would be sad in itself, right? This is the government supposed to do the job correctly, but I think they should have implemented something like, hey, if you're sick, stay home, um, and don't sort of interact, sort of do the self quarantine on your own, and let businesses stay running. So essentially, my goal for the whole thing, or my solution for the whole thing, would have been instead of just doing a complete freeze out of thin air, basically in March, when it was too late. It's just that if you're feeling bad, do not come to work. Let businesses operate. If you're an elderly, you are going to be cocooned. And if you need, there should have been a quicker acting upon sort of the situation because they knew in Asia it was really bad.
Yeah, it's true.
Then,
I agree with
so
that in theory.
yeah.
To me, what I'm grappling with though is how much of that blame can be realistically attributed to the government. Back in January, people knew that China was suffering tremendously, but there was a lot of confusion about what exactly this COVID 19 was. Even today, there's still some confusion. So
Mhm.
maybe you'll recall before people were comparing it to the flu, people were saying It might not be that serious. We might be overreacting. And there was just a lot of confusion about what was really going on. If the government tried to install some of these more harsh consequences at a time like that, do you think that people would have responded well? One of the reasons why this quarantine is working now, supposedly to some extent, is because people realize the gravity of the situation. They understand that you can die from it. It's serious. It's not the flu. But before January, people were just not taking it as seriously as they should have been. So to me, it's a
Mhm.
mixture there. It's not entirely the government's fault.
Yeah. Well, yeah, I should rephrase that. I mean, I'm not saying it's all 100% the government, right? It's not, there has to be some ease up on that. But the thing is, there should have been some protective measures with some knowledge, right? Because basically what happened, it just completely blew up in the government's faces. And because of that, they're making up for it now, right? So even though it is serious, I even still think the extent to today now is overdone. So that it is a tricky thing, and I am sympathetic. I feel like the measures should have been made in strides instead of just a one big shutdown, right? Because frankly, I mean, the way I see it is, if people have the virus now, or if you don't have the virus now, it's very possible that you had it in February and you didn't even know, right? So
Exactly.
it's kind of interesting. I think it was already in the air because I talked to many folks and they got kind of sick. Even myself personally, I got a little sick just out of the blue, and it was pretty heavy, and then it went away, right? So I think there just should have been more inside sort of work on, okay, there is something serious, but we'll make incremental steps to preventing it from getting out of hand. And then basically, I mean, we can look towards the United States, dismiss it as a conspiracy theory, right? Um, I mean, that's not careful assessment of what was actually taking place, right?
Which
And
conspiracy theory are you referring to there?
yeah, I think there was some tweets that he threw out there, and I think I think it was in early February, and he said it was a ploy by the Democrats to take down the conservatives. So, uh, I mean, that's pretty interesting, right? I mean, that's not a careful analysis of what actually was taking place,
Yes, yes.
right?
Yeah.
So, so, so essentially, my main issue with it now is, and I understand why government does this, but they're totally on the back end doing way too much, the way I see it. But of course, it's too late, right? I mean, that's the main issue.
Yeah, I want to bring in the World Health Organization into this too, because I do
Yeah.
see so many failings just across the board. This thing was not handled by basically any stakeholder appropriately. At one time, the World Health Organization was saying not to close your borders. They changed their mind after. They were acting on behalf of China a lot during the process. And this entity here, whose sole mission is to curb pandemics and whatnot, weren't acting faithfully to their mandate. And the governments, they were getting a lot of their info from an organization like that.
Mm.
So when you have a bad party, a bad actor at the top who's just funneling you nonsense, and then you start taking the virus now with the proper grain of seriousness, to me it's just the whole system itself was having issues. And after this, we're gonna have to revise the chain of information globally.
Yeah. Well, I mean, you kind of added to it, and I think yeah, the WHO also has to be responsible. I mean, if the government is getting information from them and they're not relaying it properly, then you could say they're also at blame, right? So, I mean, you might even say more so. Um, and that really was what it was. I mean, the borders should have been shut. So, if you want another measure that I can throw in, the borders should have been shut much earlier. I mean, I think even when the pandemic was known to be kind of spreading pretty rapidly, Trudeau did not shut down planes. He didn't prevent planes from coming into Canada. And that's absolutely careless, right? I mean, there are people coming from China with no mask. Um, but then all of a sudden, the local population is now forced. And again, it's the whole idea of force that I don't like, right? But it's the forced, isolation. But yet, people coming from China, it's a go, and that's kind of the tragedy of it. It's just the whole thing across the board is not taken care of swiftly, and it was not taken care of properly, right? So, um, and sadly, people are suffering because it was just inefficient, you know.
Yeah, and there's one more lesson to draw from too. It's that those who we deem to be just at the pinnacle of knowledge, they don't even know what they're saying themselves sometimes. So it's as you mentioned, very early on, a lot of countries are reluctant to close the borders. And then eventually they all did. And the rationale at the beginning was because, oh, this is ineffective, it won't do anything. And that's in part due to the WHO telling them that. And then later on,
Mhm.
they find out, oh, it's not true. We actually have to close our borders. And you see that again too with masks. At the beginning, they were telling people, don't wear a mask. It won't do anything for you, whatever, whatever. Then it turns out now they're saying, oh, you should wear a mask. So they're
Yeah,
learning like we are. And that's kind of a scary thing.
yeah, yeah. That's the crazy thing. So like, I have all the compassion for citizens, healthcare workers, right, doctors that are on the forefront, even companies that are trying to come up at the last minute here with some kind of vaccine. But as you know, I mean, the masks were implemented, and actually at first they said we should wear masks, and then they said don't wear masks, don't even worry about it, it's not going to do much. But now wear masks again, right? So the people that, like you said, we look upon to kind of know what they're talking about have no clue what they're doing, and that's the frightening part, right? And then the frightening part going forward is what is the actual resolution that's going to be taking place? What kind of laws are going to be implemented because of it? And that's where my freedom comes into effect. And that's the thing that really worries me. And actually, it pisses me off that we just kind of take complete truth when, I mean, previously they haven't been got right, and they still don't get it right. So it's yeah, that's the tricky part.
Yeah, let's balance to that now, actually. This notion of your freedoms. I believe you
Mhm.
mentioned that you feel already they're being infringed upon. Can you expand on that?
Mhm. Yeah, yeah. I mean, it's also a contentious topic, and people are definitely going to disagree with me. But the notion, I think that what should have been put out is, in terms of this quarantine. Well, first of all, like I said, I really do think that business. I don't think the government has the right to come in and say decide what businesses are essential and non-essential. Because when businesses are running, it's all essential, right? I mean, it's a living, so people need to make a living. What I think should have been done is it should have been, hey, if you're an elderly person, I don't know, I mean, what's the ballpark age? Maybe if you're over 70, you stay home. If you're, a youth, you're allowed to go out. You stay. I'm in total agreement with social distancing. I mean, you can't be totally reckless. You wash your hands, you sanitize, you do all that, but you still have a right to sort of be out and about. And I mean, in my neighborhood, the basketball courts are closed, right? They locked up. I mean, that total authoritarianism, as far as I can tell. The playgrounds are completely shut down. Joy is being sucked out of it, sucked out of our lives, and I think that's such an extreme measure that is impinging on our own rights. I mean, I should be able to go to a public court, and shoot a freaking basketball. That's just one example. Um, I don't know who's going to get sick from that, especially when you do social distance, no matter what. When you're playing basketball, you don't have to be within the 2 meters, right? So there are little things like you might just accept it, but the thing is, I don't think we as citizens should accept everything as on its face value, right? So um, some of the main measures for sure, social distancing, you take care, but you wash your hands, and you don't touch your eyes or whatever. And I've been clubbing and stuff. There's no clubbing, and obviously that doesn't make any sense. But when it comes to leisure, I mean, it can't be all completely shut down, right? Because now the government can start enforcing whatever they want going forward. And the freedom, the way I look at freedom, is like my joy too, right? Like my joy of living is being sucked out of me. So it can't be all forcefully locked down, because it also creates this very toxic, this atmosphere, right? And I've seen it too. Like the atmosphere is not a good vibe. So I think there should be some pumping, like how do I say, just lifting on some of the measures that are being taken. I think they've been too harsh.
Okay, that's very interesting. For me, I will say this. I do agree that our freedoms have been infringed upon, and that's just very obvious at the literal face level sense. You can't go play basketball. I can't do X. This is the truth. But to me, it seems justified though. I have no problems with it, and I'll start my train of thought with this. I think it's good to have these fundamental beliefs, such as your freedom of mobility, expression, even speech, and all these things. But to me, the issue is with these dogmas when they're not flexible. So, generally speaking, when things are running as they should, when things are optimal, then yes, we're going to want to have these things in place and not be played with. But when the nuance comes up, when a black swan event occurs that changes the status quo, we have to be willing to shift things around because these rules here are truly meant to just ensure the safety of society at large. And this is the problem too. It's like, how do we know that? How do we know the government is going to be acting truthfully? And
Mhm.
this is where we have to take things on a case by case basis and apply some logic and some reason. So the government telling you that you're no longer allowed to criticize the government during these times because that would be detrimental to the regime, then yes, I would see that and say, whoa, that's a pretty big step. But the government telling me that I can't go to the park anymore because it increases the risk of spreading COVID-19 to those who would likely die by, coming across this pathogen, then I look at that and I say, okay, that's reasonable. I do sacrifice some of my freedom, but what do I get in return? I'm able to flatten the curve. I'm able to deal with the virus swifter. And it seems to me that overall, it hasn't been wholly unreasonable.
Yeah, I mean, like, well, I can rebut a little bit. I mean, if I go to the court, I mean, unless elderly people are like, coming by and they're kind of rolling through, they're not most likely not going to get anything. And first of all, the elderly should not be out. So that's what I'm saying. The elderly people should not be out because they're at the highest risk of getting this. And there's a real risk for people with pre-existing conditions, right? So that information has not been wholly correct. Um, when it comes to not going to the park, that's just one step. I guarantee that if I tried to go to City Hall and get some get some other guys to kind of fight back or do some kind of protest, I would probably be locked up right now. I would not be shocked. Um, the right thing. I mean, if I actually decided to exercise my right to be mobile or to disagree with any of these policies based off the fines and based off the kind of the laws that are attempting to be implemented or these rules, I most certainly would be either locked up or fined myself, right?
Yeah, that's
That's
true.
kind
Like,
of,
mhm.
yeah,
yeah,
right? Like, yeah.
your mobility rights have been obviously restricted. But just going back to the basketball example, there's no
Mhm.
issue if you're the only one who is doing that. If you yourself decide to go to an empty court and just shoot around, then there wouldn't be a problem. But the rules have to be in place though, because we're not just dealing with one person, we're dealing with multiple people at the same time. And if two or three people start to think like you and they show up at the court, and the thing with this virus too is that we aren't even entirely sure how it spreads. It's possible, or it's been proven, that this thing can live on surfaces for up to 48 hours. It may be an airborne transmission. There's lots of ways that it can go about infecting someone. So now you're people in an area where even though you're keeping apart, there's still possibilities for you to transmit the disease through surfaces and whatnot. And if one of you ends up getting infected, you go somewhere, maybe it's a grocery store, maybe it's home, and you start infecting people, and it's a chain. This is what we're trying to curb with these practices. I do recognize that, yes, we've made some concessions. Like the freedoms are gone. If you organized a protest, you would probably be fine because you can't even be you can't be in a group
Yeah.
like that in public. But to me, I ask, is it worth it? And it seems like it is because by keeping everyone in their house, yes, we have sacrificed our joy to some extent. But on the other hand, we may be saving hundreds, if not thousands, of lives by doing it.
Well,
And it goes back to that
yeah,
nuance
yeah.
question. If the government did something heinous, if they came out and said something that was unreasonable, like what I mentioned, not being able to criticize them, then I'd be one of the first people to combat that. But taking it on a case by case basis, I just don't see these infringements to be that severe and warrant me to be rebelling right now.
What I would say is like, yeah, so it's not criticizing the government in words or terms, I guess, right? But basically, if I did go solo and if I went to City Hall and I did say, hey, you know, I put up a sign, I said, this is not right, this is not right. I mean, I'm almost 100% certain that I'd either get a fine or carry it out. Although I don't know if anyone wants to get near me, apparently, but uh, I might get some kind of jail sentence. I mean, I'm not even kidding about that. Um, so that's kind of where, yeah, I'm not critiquing, quote unquote. I'm not like writing a letter, but I'm actually showing up physically, and I would get pulled out physically. And then when it comes to, I just want to ask, is interesting, and I want to hear your opinion on this. Um, you notice the grocery stores, right? And I think they're doing the best they can, but even the measures there are not 100%. I mean, they're pretty faulty. So, for example, you go to a grocery store and you have to stand behind the other person. What is it, 2 meters, right? Or you have to stand at a certain length. But when you get in that grocery store, everybody is congested up next to each other. So how is that going to work?
Yeah, these are
So that,
flawed measures for sure.
yeah,
It's the least of the two evils though, because this is something
yeah,
that has to happen. Like you have to get food
yeah,
somehow. So people are going to be in the grocery stores, and if you don't allow people to buy food, they're going to find other ways to survive, and we might enter a worse situation with looting. So it seems to me they're just trying to make the best of a bad scenario. They're trying to
yeah.
do things, but as you mentioned, they are flawed. 2 meters apart, people don't follow that, and when you're in the aisles, you're going to be closer together to each other. So yeah, that's one of the things that is going to power this COVID-19 spread in the
Mm.
short term. This is one thing that we haven't tackled appropriately, but I'm not too sure how we do that. The only other option is we shut down the grocery stores and just deliver food to everyone. But will everyone be on board with that? Is it even possible? If it's not, then
Yeah,
we kind of have to make do with what we have.
yeah. You know, like in agreement with you. I mean, it's totally unprecedented, right? So in that sense, I understand. Like, what are you supposed to do? But I guess the way I look at it is these overriding measures, I think, are more. They create more of an atmosphere of fear than necessarily is should be than what it really should be. I mean, I would love for the government to release the numbers and go, hey, you know, with the deaths or whatever and the infected, and say 95% of the people that have died from this are over 80, right? So the fact that we're living out here and we don't actually have concrete numbers is another thing that's really making people nervous and anxious. And the information is not absolute, right? And I think if we knew the actual percentage of people that were dying um, from this virus, and I'm not saying just the general numbers, but in terms of the elderly versus the young, I mean, we'd have a much more different approach to it, and people would be much more relaxed. I mean, I want to hear your opinion on that.
Yeah, the numbers thing is just a really complicated issue. It's almost impossible to get the exact numbers. Like even with the modeling, it's problematic because the models have two methods of getting their numbers. The first is you base it on external figures from other countries, and then we ask, do those countries report accurate numbers? We know with
Mm.
China, we know with Iran, it's not the case. And trying to
Yeah,
base our models off of that is a terrible idea. And then we look at other countries too. Maybe Italy. Do we trust them? The answer could be, yeah, we do trust them, but now we have to look at the methods they're using to collect their data. There's people who don't show signs. There are people who are going under the radar. Not everyone's being tested, and that creates a certain gap in the analysis. And then the other option here is we use our own data. And even in Canada, we're not testing everybody. There are people who are going under the radar. There are people who are dying who aren't even being properly diagnosed as to what the cause of death is. And these trends create an atmosphere where we kind of have to estimate, we kind of have to assume. Getting these numbers would be a good thing, and it is true. The most vulnerable, those who are old and those who have pre-existing conditions, but the disease can still kill someone in their 40s or their 50s, and we've seen cases of that. And given this atmosphere of this confusion and not knowing the truth, I do think our best course of action is to just lay low right now. I think there was a second part to that question. Can you remind me?
yeah, yeah. Well, no, I think you covered it pretty well. It just if we knew, you know, if we knew how much percent of the elderly were dying from it compared to the young, that kind of did that kind of lead to the second thing? I mean, if we knew exactly, what I would say is the atmosphere would be better, and I think the measures we could get some normalcy, return to some normalcy, but maybe you don't agree with that.
Let me think about that. For me, it all comes down to the data. I'm just not sure when we make that call. Let's say we find out that 90% of the deaths are attributable to those who are 70 or 80. Do we make a call then to resume the economy? What if it's 85? What if it's 80? What if it's 50? What if it's 60? It's
Right,
just unclear to me where this line is drawn.
right, right. Well, I mean, that's of course why I'm frustrated and I'm disappointed because now we don't actually have an expectation of when anybody can return to normalcy, right? So, I mean, people could be sitting like this for months. And the thing is, you talk about mental health and people dying. I mean, people die every day, right? So, and obviously this is a specific situation, but if you give this month to month, and of course, business in terms of business and economy, I mean, people can't operate and people are actually losing their businesses completely, right? So with no hope of return, I mean, their whole livelihoods are shattered. So the reason why I was frustrated and angry with this from the start is that the measures should have been taken in incremental steps, and therefore it would have been mediated better. All right. So the return would have also been a gradual return. But now we have no idea when things will return to normal, right? And obviously, this thing's going to linger for years, unfortunately, right? Which is careful now. I heard you cough. I heard you
Yeah,
cough. Yeah,
yeah.
yeah. We don't know, right? We don't know. But of course, that's the thing. Without the concrete evidence, right? To just shut it all down or to put these extreme measures and have people freaking out, I think is the main issue. That's the issue. What I have with it, I'm not. I don't have an issue with the actual virus. I'm not undermining the seriousness of it, right? And I'm also sympathetic towards the elderly. But again, to sacrifice everything else for a certain age range of people in the country, I think is a bit much. And I know that sounds kind of harsh, but I mean it's a fact of life that the elderly people are going to have some pre-existing conditions, and so to shut down everything else just for the elderly, I think is a bit much. And so that's kind of where I come from with it. I just think that people have lost their livelihoods, and so you have families too, right? I mean, the parents can't take care of the kid properly, and the father can't go to work and provide to save the elderly. That's the way I look at it. Is we're doing this to predominantly save people that are over 75 or 80 with pre-existing conditions, and because they can't prove or they can't really point to the coronavirus being the only killer of people, that's the thing that I can't get with, and I just can't understand.
I think it's helpful if we zoom out maybe. So this question overall really is another one of those lesser of two evils. So on one hand, we have the economy and all the things that come with just normalcy, your mental health, all the things you mentioned. And on the other hand, we have just death and illness, pestilence. And the thing is that we it's not even fully clear that the only people we're saving are those who are elderly. There have been cases of people in their 40s and 30s who have died. And if things ramp up, and even 1%, even if the death rate is 1%, that's still a dramatic figure because our populations are in the millions. So now we look at this equation here, this dichotomy. If we restart the economy at the end of this month, for example, what happens on the other side? How many more lives do we end up losing? Would it be 1,000, 2,000, 3,000? What if we start the economy later? Is it only a couple hundred? So these are the kind of things that we're juggling right now, and it does suck. It's almost impossible to quantify the value of a human life. So but we do know there are some concessions that we will make because if we take another example, car crashes, those are things that contribute a lot to death and loss of life, but nobody is rallying to say stop driving. So what we do know is there is an acceptable
Yeah.
limit to the risk we're willing to take to have a sense of normalcy. But when it comes to a pandemic, it's a little bit of a harder choice to make because we're seeing things in real time and everyone is susceptible. There are people that we know who can die. So when we do this equation of the economy versus the human, how do we go about that? It seems to me the government only has one choice. They're not made to function on behalf of the corporations or the businesses, even if they're small or big. They're here to represent the interest of the people. So to me, it seems natural that they're siding with just shutting it down and trying to minimize the debts as much as possible, even if it comes at the cost to the economy. What do you think?
Yeah. I think that's where we'll have a little bit of this fundamental disagreement. It's just because I don't believe in sacrificing the economy because that's the disagreement. I think you just kind of you nailed it with the car crash, right? I mean, when you talk about car crashes, nobody freaks out. But when it comes to this, because it's a new thing, people are sort of they're kind of really losing it. And I think that's what it is, right? Even the way it's positioned as this virus, this big thing, um, psychologically, people are not handling it all that well. But it's funny because, like you said, people die every day from car crashes and no one blinks an eye. And that's kind of the difference. I wholeheartedly don't believe that we should have shut down the whole economy to do this, right? That's kind of where I disagree with the whole option,
Hmm.
the options of the government. And I know the government what they're going to give money now. Is that right? They're going to give if you apply for EI.
Yeah, yeah, they boosted that. Mhm.
Yeah, and of course the funny thing is now, great, but the government is giving money that is ours in the first place. You know what I mean? Like they're giving money back that should be ours in the first place. Um, and so what I'm concerned about too is gonna the government comes in and they're gonna try to be heroic, but yet they're giving all the money back that was owed to the citizens in the first place. Um, and now, once this is done, people are going to go back to relying wholeheartedly on the government, and I think that's the wrong way. Um, I don't know what it is, but people seem to, and I know you don't, but most people seem to really just take everything that the government says as truth, and kind of what they do can't do any wrong, what they do is right. And, I think that's just going to carry over. And unfortunately, I think that's what's going to happen. I wish it was the case that people really looked at it with a more sort of analytical approach and more critical thought and said, well, damn right. I want people to be saying like, hey, damn right, you owe me my money. You shut me down, you know. Um, but I don't think that's going to be the case. Or damn right, you came in a month and a half late when you should have been there a month earlier, and you let people come in from foreign countries, and you let them get out of hand. So my point is, in the whole scheme of things, they're making up for what they didn't do, right? And it's like a guy goes on a date with a girl, and he should have given her flowers or something, and then the next time he sees her, he buys her expensive gift, right? He overdoes it. He buys her a car or something, and I feel like that's what the government is doing. They're making up for what they should have done in the first place and done the right thing and done it step by step. And but again, that's where we are.
Yeah, I do think there's some truth to that. It's 100% factual to say that more could have been done earlier. I just don't know how realistic it was given the environment.
Yeah,
The World Health Organization lying to us, people being confused, doctors not knowing
yeah,
exactly what this is. I think that
yeah,
compounds to what happened there. And
yeah.
I look
Agree,
at
I agree with you on that, man. I agree
yeah,
with you on that. I think so. I'm not going to say just 100% the information wasn't correct that was coming to them, but the combination of the two is just why it's been a total failure. And I think we're coming up with ideas after the fact, right? Basically, when it's already spreading, um, we're kind of reeling, right? We're kind of pull it all together. Um, so that's
yeah,
that's kind of where we're at.
yeah. And I want to touch on another point you mentioned. It piqued my interest. So
Yeah,
I think it's something with the yeah, you mentioned the government just giving us back what we pay them. I assume you mean that we pay taxes and all they're doing is returning that revenue?
yeah, yeah. I mean, basically, I mean, look at the businesses that are going down too, right? I mean, they're getting money, um, but I mean, their whole operation is shut down, and even after this thing is done, I don't think they'll be able to recover. So I mean, that's nice, but I mean, it doesn't make up for the losses, right? I mean, it's tough.
Yeah, that's true. But at the same time, with this whole tax equation, though, this is not like the only thing you've gained from paying your taxes. For living in Canada, you receive things like having a stable government, having roads to drive on, infrastructure, the healthcare, education you received if you were born here. So to me, it's interesting to say that the government is giving you what you are owed. What encompasses that bucket?
Well, I have to look. Do you have the exact number? I don't have the exact numbers right on me, but I saw this thing. My friend was telling me that it was 1,200 a month in BC. That I think that. Do you know the exact numbers that are coming back
Yeah, I
in
think they push it
Ontario?
up. It's supposed to be something like the maximum is $2,000 a month.
Okay. I mean, that's pretty. I guess that's pretty good for some folks, right? Um, all I'm saying really is that number is not too bad. But to me, when it comes down to it, when you look at it on the overlying thing, it's just that the government is making up for what they screwed up. So like no amount of money you can give people money, you can do that. But I think that's a smoke screen. That's a way to get people hooked back onto the government. That's the way I'm looking at wealth, or at least trying to, right? When in a proper economy. So um, yeah, that's where I'm looking at it. I'm just looking at it. They're making up for for failure, basically, and this is a way to, if a parent doesn't raise their kid properly, and then down the road they just say, here's some money to make up for not taking care of their kid properly. I mean, that doesn't solve the issue, right?
Mm, yeah. So maybe now we should move on to the final
Yeah,
segment of our conversation.
sounds good.
Where do we go from here? What do you think the answer to that is?
Do you want to start first? I don't know. I mean, that's
Okay. Yeah,
yeah,
I think for me, there only seems to be one plausible path forward, and that is a data-driven approach. For me, it seems the only reasonable point to resume normalcy and bring back is the life we once knew, is when the curve starts to die down, and we've come to a point where we know the virus is on its way out. In China, it took some months. America is expecting to peak during, I believe, the next 2 weeks, and they'll be going down from there. To me, giving a timeline at this point is just useless. To me, everything comes with the data. Once we realize the threat has been minimized as much as possible, then we can do it. And the only reason why I say that is because I'm not willing to forego any lives in the pursuit of just restarting the economy as soon as possible. Of course, there's a balance there, but I am putting priority on the welfare of people. So that probably taints the way I'm viewing things.
Yeah, that's interesting because in China, I don't buy the data. I mean, they have no new cases. I don't see how to. I mean, unless they just killed all the. um, yeah, I don't know. The data in China is I can't believe that. But yeah, when it comes to the other thing, I guess the challenge is, yeah, when does this thing return? Like, when do we return to some normalcy? I don't know if it'll ever be the case, and it might be years. But I think the tricky thing is we boil it down to no new deaths. I guess that's an interesting thing, right? Because they don't know, whether it's just strictly coronavirus that kills a person or a person has pre-existing conditions. How can they possibly narrow that down? Um, so that's the tricky part. How are they going to know specifically that, yeah, there's no new death, or this death didn't come from corona, or this death came directly from corona? They'll never know that. The thing is, I don't know the answer in terms of specifically when we can actually get back up and running. Um, and that's the crazy part. People are going to be just sitting here dormant, essentially. And you said, what did you say, 2 weeks?
America is predicting that they're going to reach their peak in about 2 weeks or 1 week, 1 to 2 weeks. And then from there,
Yeah.
hopefully, they'll be on the downward slope.
Uh, yeah. I mean, again, they didn't know what they were talking about previously, right? So um, that's the problem, right? I mean, they, the information has not been accurate um, in the past. So how do we believe it now? And then how do we believe it going in the future? And that's my big concern, is that I don't know if the information being relayed is absolutely correct. I hope you're right. I hope it is 2 weeks. That would be fantastic. And then maybe things start to resume in a month. But because yeah, it's just been completely unprecedented, right? I mean, with no sports, no entertainment, um, no physical locations to really hang out at. It's really a psychological experiment that we kind of, as a generation, we've never experienced. So I wish I had the answer in terms of what to do going forward. I would just say the businesses have to start getting back up, and people have to try their best to return to normal, um, and kind of just let things be. I mean, I really don't know what to tell you in terms of the exact solutions going forward, but I hope you're right. I hope the numbers are correct, and I hope that it can be 2 to 3 weeks. I think it's going to be all the way to June. I think the Toronto mayor said he shut down for 12 weeks. Um, that's a long time.
Yeah, it is.
And
So
again, and the sad thing is, I can't believe government. Like, I don't know I don't know whether to take them seriously or not, right? Because where were you when we needed you, right? So, it comes in and he said 12 weeks. I think that's asinine to have this go on that long. But again, I mean, like you said, you don't believe that, I could be penalized if I oppose, these orders. So you really just have to suck it up, essentially. You don't actually have that much choice, even though you'd like to think that, right? So I see where you're coming from. You're kind of just rolling with the punches, and I think that's good in itself too. Um, that's all you can sort of do, right? I mean, you really can't do much else.
yeah, that's true. I think it's intriguing just to like hear a more pessimistic approach with the government. It's
Yeah.
just interesting. It makes me wonder about a couple of things. I think my
Yeah.
final remark on this would be
Yeah.
that this is set to be a defining moment in our generation. Just
Mm.
I look back to something like the Great Depression, and people who lived through that had their lives fundamentally altered. People adapted new habits, such as being extremely frugal, because of the events that preceded them. With something like this, I do believe it's going to have a similar effect. There's going to be some things that are just ingrained to us after coming out on the other side. Maybe that's we stop handshaking. Maybe it's we create more distance between us. Maybe it's that we don't feel comfortable going to concerts anymore. But I do think there will
Yeah.
be some type of paradigm shift, and I'm interested to see how that manifests itself.
Yeah, I do see some positivity in that. I think there are things going forward. I mean, it's funny, like the dating apps and stuff, it's kind of ridiculous. Like, has to be changed in itself already. So I don't know how you feel about clubbing and pubbing, but maybe there are better ways to use your time. I mean, there are families in isolation, so this is a lot of bonding time for families. And so maybe this is the time to really see actually valuable and important. And I think in terms of being frugal, I think you're right. If you didn't have savings, potential for disaster. Well, here's your disaster, right? Here's your quote unquote Great Depression. I mean, this is a time for people not to blow money on useless stuff, and not to throw away their dollars, right? Their hard-earned money. So this is an opportunity for people to think about how to go, how to make proper steps forward in improving their own lives, and sort of maybe bonding with their families, and just thinking about the economic fragility that we live in, right? I mean, it sort of was a house of cards prior to this. I mean, the economy was going to hit a wall just because the government can't print money forever. Um, so this is kind of the tidal wave that we had, and so now we're all in it, right? So um, it's just interesting. I think what people should take out of going forward and what people should think about is to prepare for disasters, prepare for stuff that can happen. And we've never had it better in this society. I mean, life is really good, and it still is good, even with this disaster. I mean, we have all the tools at our fingertips, right? And we can connect through technology. There are a lot of applications that we have, and it's not quite the same suffering as it was 100 years ago, and we can connect with family. But I think the thing is to prepare for disasters, not spend wildly on things you don't need, and really think about how you're going to manage kind of the ups and downs, right? Because we didn't have ups and downs for the last 10 years, 20 years, really. I know there was a stock market crash and the housing crash in '08, but not like this, where things just plummeted. So we've had it really too good, and we've had it so good. And so the question is this going to toughen us up? That remains to be seen, right?
Yeah, I think that's a good note to end things on. So, Jake, once again, it was a pleasure talking.
Yep. Thanks, man, and take care of yourself. All right. Thanks for having the show.
Yeah, you too. I'll see you around.